This story happened when I was around 17, but even now, it still makes me uneasy whenever I think about it. Back in May of 2016, I had gotten really into riding my mountain bike. Riding around the streets had started to feel boring, repetitive, so I decided to try something new, biking on a trail through the woods. After doing a bit of research, I settled on Lee Woods. It seemed like the best option. It was only a couple of miles from where I lived, so the ride there was short and actually pretty enjoyable. The weather was nice, and there was something peaceful about heading toward the edge of the forest. As I arrived, I noticed how calm and quiet everything felt, surprisingly so for a woodland area in England, especially being so close to Bristol. There was something almost magical about it. It was truly breathtaking. Once I entered the woods, I saw signs at the start of each trail, marked with different colors. I think they indicated how difficult each route was for bikers, and maybe how long they were for walkers, though I wasn't entirely sure. I chose one of the trails. I think it was marked blue, but I don't remember clearly. It was fun. Peaceful, even. But after a while, I wanted more of a challenge, so I decided to try one of the harder trails. That's when things started to feel strange. As I biked deeper into the woods, I started to feel a bit weird, like the forest was swallowing me up. Everything around me seemed to grow larger, and yet somehow further away at the same time. The trees looked taller, the shadows darker. The path behind me began to feel unfamiliar, like I'd never ridden it in the first place. I tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself I was just imagining things. But then I realized something that made my stomach drop. I had completely lost track of time. Worse, I had no idea where I was. I was lost. Normally, I'm very aware of my surroundings. I'm not the type to panic easily. But this time felt different. Unnatural, somehow. Eventually, I came to an odd open area where the trail split into two paths. One path veered left, it seemed like it might lead out of the woods. The other went right, heading deeper into the trees. But just as I was about to choose, I noticed something else. A third trail. It was narrow. Almost hidden. It branched off from the middle, winding through the trees in a way that felt wrong. There was no sign. No markings. Just a thin, crooked trail that didn't seem safe at all. Something in my gut told me to turn back. Everything about that trail screamed danger. But for some reason, maybe curiosity, maybe stubbornness, I ignored the feeling. And I went down it. The deeper I went, the worse the trail became. It was rough, uneven, and filled with sharp dips and rocks. Eventually, it got so bumpy that even walking was difficult. My bike rattled beneath me with every step. That's when I finally stopped. And I made the decision to turn back. But before I turned around, I just stood there for a few minutes, staring down that narrow trail. I didn't know why. There was nothing unusual to see, just the same rough, uneven path winding deeper into the woods, but something held me there. I started feeling this strange sensation, like I was being watched. Not just from one direction, but from everywhere. It didn't make any sense. I hadn't seen a single person out there, and there was no reason for anyone to be in that area. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling, like dozens of eyes were silently locked on me from the trees. I felt a chill run down my spine. Uneasy, I got nervous and started walking back up the hill, pushing my bike along beside me. I was too tired to ride it at that point. Just so you know, my bike was in perfect condition. The tires were fine, no punctures, no slow leaks, nothing wrong at all. I'd checked it before the ride and had no issues getting to the trail. But when I got back to the spot where I had first entered the strange trail, that feeling hit me again. The weird, warped sense of lost time. Only this time, it felt darker. Heavier. Like something bad was just about to happen. Keep in mind, I hadn't seen a single person since I started on the very first trail. It was completely empty. Silent. Let me describe the scene a bit more clearly. The path I was on was long and narrow, with a slightly steep hill rising up to my left. On my right side was a small river, maybe 4 feet wide and 4 feet deep. It flowed gently along beside the trail, and on the other side, there were bushes and a few scattered trees. Sparse, but thick enough to hide someone, if they wanted to be hidden. As I walked about a quarter of the way up the sloping path, I suddenly heard something. A woman crying. The sound was soft at first, muffled, like it was coming from behind a tree up ahead. I slowed down immediately, trying to figure out what I was hearing. I kept asking myself, why would someone cross the river just to cry alone in the woods? Still, I felt like I had to check. I moved closer to the edge of the river, peering across the water toward the tree where I thought the sound had come from. I wasn't expecting anything creepy, honestly. I was hoping someone just needed help. But when I got close, the crying stopped. And no one was there. I stood frozen for a few seconds, feeling the unease creep back up my spine. Then I slowly turned away from the river and kept walking. This time, I picked up the pace. I wasn't running yet, but I could feel my nerves starting to build. I've had strange experiences before, weird feelings, unexplained noises, but they usually happened indoors. Houses. Buildings. Not in the woods. This was different. As I walked, a sudden shiver ran through my whole body. I didn't know why. It came out of nowhere. About a minute later, not far from where I had heard the first crying, it started again. Only this time, it was louder. And closer. It was right across the river from me. I didn't stop to look. Something inside me just said go. I started jogging, then running. My heart pounded in my chest as the crying grew more frantic, more desperate. And then, from the bushes across the water, I heard something else. Rustling. Like someone, or something, was moving fast through the undergrowth, trying to keep pace with me. It was right there, just on the other side of the river. And it was following me. I picked up speed. My legs ached, but I didn't care. The fear had kicked in fully now. When I reached my bike, I went to hop on, but the adrenaline hit me so hard, I stopped dead in my tracks. I looked down. And to my shock, my back tire was completely flat. I froze for a second, blinking in disbelief. I had checked it earlier, it was fine. Perfect, actually. No leaks. No damage. Nothing. I bent down and gave it a quick check, but there was no time to do anything more than that. Whatever was happening, I couldn't stay there. With no other choice, I grabbed my bike and started sprinting, holding it awkwardly in front of me, letting it bounce and rattle as I ran. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I just kept hoping I wouldn't trip, or be forced to drop the bike to move faster. Every step felt heavy. Clumsy. And behind me, that crying was still going. Louder. Closer. It wasn't fading. It was keeping up. I pushed harder, lungs burning, legs aching, praying with everything in me just to get off that path. I felt like crying, not just from fear, but from the sheer helplessness of it all. I couldn't help whoever was crying. I couldn't escape any faster. I was stuck in this nightmare. After what felt like an hour, though it was probably only 5 or 10 minutes, I finally saw something up ahead. The car park. The moment I saw it, the crying behind me started to change direction. It began moving away. Back toward the spot where I had first heard it, near the tree and the river. That didn't make me feel any better. I sprinted into the car park like my life depended on it. I was gasping for breath, sweating, shaking. I must have looked like I was about to collapse. A few people nearby turned and stared at me like I was crazy. I didn't care. I spotted the exit sign and made a beeline for it. I was still carrying the bike, completely drained, just wanting to get as far away from those woods as possible. But as I got closer to the exit, something strange happened. I noticed the bike felt different in my hands. Smoother. Lighter. I looked down. And I couldn't believe it, the back tire was fully inflated again. Just like that. It looked exactly the same as it had before all the crying started. No signs of a puncture. No air hissing out. No damage. Nothing. It was like it had never gone flat at all. I didn't stop to question it. I jumped on my bike and rode away from Lee Woods as fast as I possibly could. This happened about 3 years ago, when I was around 15. Something unusual occurred in my village, and even now, I don't talk about it often. Mostly because people either laugh or assume I'm just making it up. But lately, I've been thinking about it more and more. And I feel like it's finally time to tell the story. My village is in a quiet, rural area, surrounded by dense forests, winding rivers, and a lot of wildlife. The government has protected the region for over 30 years, calling it a natural paradise. Because of that, exploring it is difficult, cutting down trees is forbidden, and the forest is huge. Endless, even. That summer, I was staying in the village with my grandmother. Hiking had become one of my favorite ways to pass the time, but I had never gone into the woods alone. I always stuck to the paved roads and familiar trails where other people passed through. It felt safer that way. Then, one afternoon, my grandma told me something interesting. Apparently, a group of workers had recently cleared out an old forest path, one that had been blocked for decades by fallen trees, thick bushes, and overgrowth. They had reopened it because a local race was being planned for runners, and the route passed through that area. That path hadn't been used in over 30 years. Normally, when I walked to the nearest town, which took about an hour, I followed the main road. It was long but familiar. But that day, after hanging out in town with a few friends, I remembered the new path my grandma had mentioned. She told me it was safe now, and I was curious. I figured it might be a shortcut, something different from my usual routine. So, I took it. At first, the path looked completely fine. The bushes had been trimmed back, and the ground was smooth enough to follow easily. It actually felt nice to be off the road, peaceful, even. I thought maybe this would become my new regular route. But looking back now, taking that path was a huge mistake. The first section was simple, though there were a few obstacles here and there. Some minor landslides, fallen branches, and uneven terrain. Nothing I couldn't handle. But then came the second part. It was a steep hill. Really steep. Covered in loose rocks and dirt. Climbing it was brutal. I had to use both my hands and feet, almost crawling like a dog just to keep from sliding back down. When I finally reached the top, panting and covered in dust, I saw something that made me stop cold. Bones. Scattered across the ground were animal bones. Some large, some small, cracked and weathered, but unmistakably real. I tried not to panic. This area was known for its wildlife, especially wolves and the occasional bear that came out at night. So I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Just nature. Still, something about it made me uncomfortable. I picked up my pace. And kept moving. I kept walking, but something in me felt uneasy. This part of the path had leveled out. The slope was gone, and the ground was smoother, making it easier to walk. It should have felt like a relief. The hard part was finally over. And for a brief moment, it did feel that way. But then I reached a dead end. Out of nowhere, massive trees had fallen across the path. Not scattered randomly, but perfectly lined up, one after another, completely blocking the trail. There was no way over them. No space to squeeze around either. It didn't look natural. What struck me as odd was that there weren't any other fallen trees nearby. Just these. As if someone had deliberately placed them there, not dropped by a storm, but arranged like a barricade. That's when I saw it. Right beside the fallen trees, stood a small barn. Old. Worn. Tilted slightly to one side from years of weather damage. It sat in the middle of the forest, far from any houses, farms, or even signs of human activity. Just there. Alone. Something about it instantly made me uncomfortable. It didn't make any sense for a barn to be this deep in the woods, especially with no road or field leading to it. I assumed it had to be abandoned, forgotten over time. Trying not to think too much about it, I tossed my backpack over a nearby wooden fence and climbed over. I wanted to find a way around the fallen trees, and cutting through the field seemed like the only option. At first, I didn't notice what was wrong. But as I crossed the fence and stepped into the field, something felt off. There were no trees. No bushes. No tall grass. Not a single large plant. The entire area was just flat, bare ground, as if the forest had decided to stop growing at the edge of that fence. Like it had been cleared recently, or worse, like nothing could grow there. I stood there for a moment, confused. If the barn was truly abandoned, then the field should have been overrun by now. 30 years is a long time, nature reclaims everything. And yet, this place was open and untouched, like it had been kept that way on purpose. Then my thoughts went back to the fallen trees. The way they were arranged. Too perfect. Too intentional. Now there was a barn next to them. And a field with no sign of life. None of it made sense. And the more I stood there, the more something inside me whispered that something wasn't right. Still, I pressed forward. Eventually, I spotted the last hill up ahead, the one my grandma had told me about. It was the final stretch before the path returned to the village. I felt a wave of relief. I was almost home. The hill was familiar. I recognized it right away, the one that led straight back to the village. I remember feeling this small spark of relief. I told myself, once I reach the top, I'll be safe. Back among houses. Back with people. Back in the world that made sense. But even as I walked toward it, that strange feeling, that tight, crawling sensation in my chest, wouldn't go away. Then, everything changed. The forest went silent. Completely. No birds. No rustling leaves. Just this unnatural, heavy silence, like the whole forest was holding its breath. And then, I heard it. Crack. A branch snapped behind me. I froze. At first, I told myself it was probably just a bird. Or maybe a rabbit, or some small animal moving through the brush. I wanted to believe that. But the sound didn't stop. Crack. Step. Rustle. Step. It wasn't the scattered noise of wildlife. It was rhythmic. Steady. Footsteps. Someone, or something, was walking behind me. I tried to calm down. Tried to keep moving. Tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. But my heart was pounding now, so loud I could barely hear. And worse, the footsteps were getting closer. They weren't just behind me. They were matching my pace, step for step. I walked faster. The footsteps did too. I sped up. So did they. And that's when I knew, whatever it was following me. And it wasn't going to stop. Panic took over. I ran. Hard. Fast. As fast as my legs would carry me. Behind me, the footsteps kept up. Thudding, crunching, gaining speed. Then, out of nowhere. Grunts. Loud. Deep. Too loud to be human. Too close. Everything blurred after that. All I remember is running for my life. My lungs burned. My legs were giving out. But somehow, I reached the village in just a minute or two. I ran straight into the yard of the first house I saw. Luckily, it was my relative's house. I burst through the front door and slammed it shut behind me, my chest heaving, heart hammering in my ears. I didn't speak. I just stood there for 10 minutes, shaking. Trying to breathe. Trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, once I'd calmed down a little, I left and walked the rest of the way home. But I've never forgotten what happened that day. Even now, thinking about it gives me chills. I can still remember the awful silence. The snapping of branches. The heavy, impossible grunts echoing through the woods. The feeling of being completely alone, no phone signal, no help, no way out. And worst of all, the feeling that something out there didn't want me to make it back. The barn. The perfectly fallen trees. That field where nothing grew. It all felt deliberate. Like it was meant to slow me down. To make sure I didn't get away. Since then, I've never gone into the woods alone. And I never will again. Now, I'm always watching. Always listening. Because out there, somewhere, something is still waiting. I'm not someone who typically believes in the paranormal. I've always been a skeptic, especially when it comes to strange or unexplained experiences. But there have been a few moments during my hunting and hiking trips that I just can't shake. One of the most unsettling occurred about 7 or 8 years ago. I usually hunted on my family's land, a quiet and familiar place surrounded by dense woods and open fields. I knew the land well, every trail, every tree. But on this particular day, something drew me to try hunting on public land instead. Maybe I was looking for a change of scenery, or perhaps I just wanted to explore a new place. The public land was much larger, with thick trees and winding trails that felt unfamiliar. At first, it was peaceful. The kind of calm that only the woods can provide. But as the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was fall, but unusually warm for that time of year. The kind of warmth that felt out of place. Like the weather itself was slightly wrong. I drove down the access road, parking at the usual spot where other hunters often leave their vehicles before heading into the woods. When I stopped, I noticed a couple of older men standing there. At first, they didn't seem out of the ordinary. But then something caught my attention. There was no car or truck nearby. They'd walked in, and that struck me as strange. They were dressed in hunter orange, which stood out even more in the fading light. It felt odd, but I figured they were probably just backpackers or campers. There was a campground nearby, and many people used it as a weekend getaway. Maybe they were just taking a break before heading back to their campsite. After all, it wasn't unusual for someone to want some quiet time in the woods, even if they weren't hunting. I told myself there was nothing to worry about. They seemed friendly enough, like many other hunters I had met before. Probably just a couple of country guys, from the way they spoke. We exchanged a few words, then they headed off into the woods. I stayed in my truck for a while, scrolling through my phone, giving them a head start. I didn't want to risk scaring away any squirrels by going in too soon. But I guess I didn't wait long enough. About 10 minutes up the trail, the path curved to the left. But then I heard something. It was a noise, coming straight ahead, and it immediately caught my attention. It was louder than the typical sounds of squirrels or small animals. I'm always on the lookout for wildlife when I'm out in the woods, so I decided to check it out. The sound didn't seem far off the main path, so I carefully stepped off the trail. As I moved deeper into the woods, the ground started to slope downward, giving me a clearer view. That's when I saw them again. The two men. But something was wrong. Their behavior was off. This is hard to explain, but they weren't moving like normal people. It wasn't just that they were walking strangely, their movements were jerky, unnatural. It was like they didn't know how to bend their knees, or how to use their joints properly. It was the kind of thing that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't stick around to figure out what was going on. I quickly backed away, trying to make as little noise as possible, and then I ran back to my car. My heart was pounding the entire way. Afterward, I spoke to a few open-minded outdoorsmen in the area. You know, the kind of people who are willing to listen to strange stories. But none of them had ever heard anything like what I'd seen. I also spent years searching online, hoping to find a story or experience similar to mine. But no matter how much I looked, I couldn't find anything that matched what I had witnessed. We don't hear cars or trucks passing by very often. The drive to the nearest store takes about 15 minutes, so we usually stock up on things when we go. Our yard is about 5 acres, and we often see wild turkeys, armadillos, coyotes, and, of course, deer. Our land used to be an old grape farm, so there are many small ridges in the ground where grapes once grew. A herd of about 7 to 13 deer, including mothers and their babies, often rest in these ridges in the mornings. They like to eat the gardenia flowers in our yard. We usually leave the deer alone and keep our dogs and chickens inside until they leave. A few months ago, I started waking up early to enjoy my coffee on the back porch. I loved watching the deer move around the yard. They are most active at sunrise, stretching and walking around after waking up. Over time, I noticed one deer that seemed different. This one often stood still and stared at the house with full attention, almost as if it was trying to figure something out. It wasn't scared or in a hurry like the others. Even when I wasn't outside, I'd look through the window and see it standing there, watching the house. It felt a little strange, but I couldn't tell why it acted that way. I would sit in our computer room at the back of the house, and it always felt like something was watching me. When I looked out the window, there it was, the same deer, staring straight at the house. It didn't just glance at us with one eye, like a normal deer. It used both eyes, almost like it was looking down its nose at us. My mom noticed it too, and it made both of us uneasy. Then one morning, I thought the deer had finally left. So, I let my dog outside. My dog is big and black, but very friendly. My dog is gentle and loves to chase birds and deer, but if they don't run, he loses interest because he thinks they're not playing with him. Our chickens are used to him now and usually don't pay attention, often sticking close to our small livestock dog for safety. That morning, when I let my dog outside, he immediately spotted the deer and bolted toward them. But suddenly, about 100 feet from the deer, he froze in place. His tail dropped, and he tucked it between his legs. I followed his gaze and saw the odd deer again, the one that always stared at the house. It was watching him closely, its head slightly tilted, and its nose pointed directly at him. The way it stared felt really weird, almost like it wasn't afraid, but was challenging him instead. My dog, who usually never backs down, turned and slowly walked back toward the house. I called him back, and he ran to me, hiding behind my legs like he was scared. I looked at the deer, and it turned to stare at me. That's when I noticed something wasn't right. It didn't look like a normal deer. Its eyes seemed too big for its head, and its body looked a little off, like the parts didn't fit together properly. At first glance, it seemed like a real deer, but the more I looked, the stranger it seemed. I've seen plenty of deer before, but this one just didn't look right. It was like something was pretending to be a deer, like it had put on a deer's skin, but it didn't fit properly. The whole thing gave me an uneasy feeling. We started a new habit of closing the blinds in the morning and waiting until the sun was higher in the sky before letting the dogs outside. After a while, construction began on the land next to us, which was sold. It was about 100 acres of land being cleared. Since then, we haven't seen any deer, and I think that's for the best.